Right. Well, welcome to Pre-Flight Checklist, local code quality for Drupal developers. Today I'll talk about a new ddev add-on designed to make it easy to set up local code quality projects. I'm sorry, make it easy to set up code quality checks for Drupal website projects. And later I'll demo the workflow of running through all the checks and making fixes. So here's that repo in case you'd like to play along while I'm demoing this later. And we'll see this slide again later on, so don't feel like you need to hurry to get it. But who am I? Hi everyone, I'm Bob, Ultra Bob on Drupal.org. You might recognize this avatar from my Drupal.org profile or Drupal Slack. And I've started generating a new AI generated adaptation of this avatar my wife drew for me for each talk I give. And here is this one. I asked the AI to make me look smart and it added glasses, so that checks out. I'm Drupal practice lead at Kalamuna, who I very much appreciate letting me take the time to talk to you today. I volunteer with the Drupal Recording Initiative, so if you speak at these type of events, I may have reminded you to push that big red button. And I like to make things, whether it be woodworking, 3D printing, electronics, or software. I build Drupal sites for a living, which means I submit my code to robots that politely reject it. So a quick virtual show of hands. Who here has contributed code on Drupal.org? Not going to be able to see any hands, but um, and who has stared at the GitLab CI pipeline on a merge request, waiting to find out if you pass? And then who passes on the first time every time? And if you raised your hand for that last one, please give me a shout after the session. I need your tips. So you've probably shipped changes you felt good about, then had CI find small issues you missed. If those checks are only in CI, every miss costs the few minutes of pipeline cycle, plus however long it takes for you to notice that the pipeline's done and context switch. Today, I'll show you how to run the same default checks locally so you catch issues before you push. You'll leave with a repeatable setup that only takes a couple of minutes, IDE feedback, a quick primer on how to use these tools to clean up your project, and a workflow that shortens review cycles. This is beginner friendly, so if you've never touched these tools, you're in the right room. And here's the issue. You push, you switch to another task, your pipeline fails, you switch back, you fix it, rinse and repeat. That is CI ping pong. CI checks on your code are important, but CI failures take attacks from you in context switching and lost focus. They also slow reviews and delay releases. I've tried to illustrate this by this developer trying to multitask. He sent the ball off into the void and has got his paddle at the ready for when the ball comes back to him, but he's trying to work on something else, and clearly he isn't going to do either thing well. The solution to CI ping pong is not to hit the ball more carefully, it's to get the ball to come back quickly so you can get a good rally going. The answer is getting the feedback immediately in your editor and terminal, where fixes cost seconds. Fix the issues while you're still in the right context. And we're not inventing a new rulebook here. We're using Drupal.org GitLab CI template defaults locally, ESLint, Stylelint, PHPCS, PHPStan, all the tools GitLab CI templates can run by default. Easy, right? I thought so when I submitted the session. I started planning out a tutorial for how to set up all this tooling to run with the right config in your projects and realized very quickly that it was a lot of work and I would never do it on my own projects unless it was a lot easier. And the real value to me was to get my team to run the tools too. So that was kind of a non-starter. So that sent me down a 2-month process of building a ddev add-on to make it easy to get this tooling set up on your project and make sure everyone on your team will have these tools available to them with a minimum of effort. So the ddev add-on installs config files, adds IDE-friendly shims, and keeps command behavior aligned with Drupal.org expectations. We start with parity. If the local checks line up with CI defaults, you avoid surprises. And then from there, you can adjust your configs as makes sense for your project. So let's just take a look at a brief primer on the tooling in case you're not familiar. PHPCS checks PHP coding standards. It is configured to check all Drupal coding standards and best practices out of the box with this setup. PHPStan does static analysis for PHP, analyzing code to find bugs and logical issues. ESLint checks JavaScript correctness and style. Prettier enforces consistent formatting for JavaScript, YAML, and CSS and Sass. Stylelint checks CSS and related style sheets. And CSpell catches spelling mistakes in your comments, strings, and identifiers. There's no deep tooling knowledge needed today. We'll just run simple commands and read output. So why a ddev add-on? ddev keeps the environment consistent, and the add-on makes the code quality tooling setup repeatable across projects and teams. I really wanted a way to set this up and instantly enable my team to see the same checks in their editors. So now we're going to dive into installing the add-on to this Runway Ops website. I've made some mistakes in advance, so the code quality tools will have something to do. So let me just switch over to my terminal. Hopefully that's big enough, but give me a shout if it's not. Start out by just checking status in Git, and we've got a clean repo here. So now, oh, whoops, I'll run the command to get the add-on. It's add-on Git and then whatever the GitHub repo is. So in this case, it's ultrabob/ddev-drupal-code-quality. The ddev installer copies the code quality ddev commands and shims into place, and then offers to set things up in the recommended way. I'm going to choose no here to let us see what's happening, but I'm going to choose the same options you'd get if you accepted the recommendation. So I'm going to hit no. And I need to zoom out of my way. Okay. Phase 1 checks whether PHP code quality tools are available. And this is a stock Drupal 11 site with a little bit of custom code, so we don't have these tools yet. We'll let it install the Drupal core dev package, which bundles all the tools we need for PHP. So I'll just accept that. And we'll see it run a composer install. And then it went by pretty quick, but phase 2 copies in the default config files used in GitLab CI. And GitLab CI uses some files from Drupal core and provides others in its template. And we add a few lines on just to make sure that we're testing custom code and not contrib code. And now we're asked what level we'd like PHPStan to report at by default. GitLab CI uses level 0, which is really conservative. Even core currently uses level 1. So hopefully your custom code isn't quite as much to maintain as core. I'd recommend starting with level 3. So that's what I'm going to do here, if I can type it. Phase 3 is about JavaScript, CSS, and spelling tools, which are node binaries. At this stage, you're asked whether it's okay to install the dependencies that include these tools. If you use yarn like core does, we detect that and keep with that workflow. Otherwise, we'll fall back to the npm workflow. So let's go ahead with that install. And it's just running it's added things into the package.json and then installs them. There are some deprecation warnings here. You'll get the same deprecation warnings if you try and install the npm dependencies for core. The output of the ddev commands gets written into a DCQ reports directory that you'll likely never want checked into your code base. So I'll say yes to Git ignoring that. And now the installer offers to bring in some config for VS Code to point common code quality extensions at our shims so that when you're in your editor, those same checks will be running in the container too, and you'll be able to see that, and we'll show that in a little bit. I'll select merge here, which will try to merge the settings from this add-on with any settings that I might already have. And then finally, I get a report of everything that was done. If we have a quick look at Git, well, first I'll just point out it tells you what's been installed. It suggests what you might try next. Um, and it tells you to do a restart. But first, let's just run that same Git check to see what we've got. You see that we have the updated git ignore file. Composer's been changed since we installed core dev. We've got the tooling added in .ddev. We have a bunch of code quality tooling configs. We have the VS Code directory, which has those settings updates that we made. And we have package.json and package.lock.json. So I'll go ahead and check all of that in. And I'll restart ddev. As soon as this comes up, we'll be able to start running commands. Most of the commands would run even without a restart, but it's always a good idea to do that restart. Okay, so let's just see what we've got here. I'll try out PHPStan. And it ran, it checked 7 files, and it found issues across 3 of them. It looks like it's found 5 issues. Um, Let me switch over to the IDE and see if that'll show anything. One of the issues that popped up was in the modules file for a custom module, so I'll open that up. Um, and I'll filter down to just, it's already filtered, okay. And we see some errors from PHPCS. We see some stuff from PHPStan, as well as some of the built-in IntelliFence and PHP things that come from VS Code. Not sure why it's telling me it's failing to find a config file, but we do have one right here, which we'll look at in a little bit. Um, if I switch back over, I can run all of the checks with that recommended command that showed up at the end of the installer with ddev checks. And that reports at the end how many different checks had issues. We can't get around, at least I haven't figured it out yet, this failed to run issue that comes out of ddev whenever a command returns an exit code that's not a success. And these code quality toolings return a failure exit code when they don't pass. So we always get this, which can be confusing. But just switching over to the editor one more time, if I look into this DCQ reports folder, we can see logs of all of those runs that happened as part of ddev checks. So if you want to run checks once and then slowly start working your way through, you have all these logs that you can use to do that. Okay, back to the slides for a minute. I just want to talk about how you can get the add-on onto your project and how you can help me to make it better. So you can install the project with this command that's showing up in this terminal window here, ddev add-on get ultrabob / ddev -drupal-code-quality. And that corresponds to a GitHub repo at the URL you see at the bottom of the slide, which is also where that QR code points to. And that is where your issues and your pull requests are sure to find a loving home. So please feel free to file your issues there. Let me know what's not working well. I'll try to help you out. If you have a fix for it, please file a pull request. Any help is, or requests for help is very welcome. So we're about to dive back into the demo and show the real magic of all of this, but here's a quick screenshot. And I find the magic of all of this to be those squiggles that you see up here. Having a quick look at the problems the tools can scan while you're writing the code is invaluable to being able to turn around code quality quick. You can see right when you're typing it that in this case we've said that we're going to return an integer and now we're returning a string. You can notice that you can fix it. And here's how the magic happens. Shims are little local entry points for your IDE to call, just like they'd call a regular binary in the system. But these shims turn around and pass the calls to the ddev command wrappers. The wrappers map host file paths to container paths within Docker, so the checkers can run there. Then they translate any paths in the results that come back inside the Docker container back out to host paths. And that path mapping is why the IDE diagnostics still point to the right files when you get them out. The configs come from Drupal core and Drupal.org GitLab CI template defaults, as I said earlier, and they're copied into your project root so that you can edit them as you need to. So now I'd like to demo using these tools to detect and fix some of the issues on the project. So we can start out. We just ran the full tool suite. I don't need to run it again. And we've got 6 checks found in PHPCS, PHPStan, ESLint, Stylelint, Prettier, and CSpell. Which is a failure for pretty much all of the tools we have, except for Composer Validator. Composer is valid, and there's a PHP parallel checker that we only run if that tool is installed, and most of the time it's not. Um, as I said earlier, the output of each of those tests is written into the DCQ reports directory, so you can focus on fixing one check at a time, even if you ran all these checks at once. So let's get to fixing. We'll start with doing some coding standards checks on the PHP files. PHPCS is configured to check Drupal and Drupal practice rule sets. So it should catch anything that violates Drupal coding standards out of the box, but you can add any additional rules you want to scan in on top of that in your config file. Let's run ddev PHPCS. And we got several warnings here. We can scroll through and see the details if we want, but I can tell you that we have several fixable issues currently. And one unfixable issue, you can see they're marked as fixable with this X. And there's one unfixable issue in the theme. Let's see. So let's open the .module file. We already have it open, and I'll just show it to you in the ID. Or we had it open. I guess it's closed again. So there are 2 PHPCS issues in this. We can see it down here, where you can also see whether it's marked as auto-fixable or not. This one is. And the 2 are one, that this function doesn't have a doc comment. And the other one is that this to-do format is not the recommended format for to-do comments. Now, obviously, we can fix the lack of a doc block on this function, but we can't actually automatically fix the fact that that doc block has no comment or has no content. So we'll see that this becomes an unfixable issue after we fix it. But let's run in and do the fixing. So the fixing tool for PHPCS is called PHP Code Beautifier, which is PHPCBF. And if we run that, it tells us it has fixed 5 issues in those 2 files, and it left 1 remaining issue. And so if we run PHPCS again, remember we had the 1 issue in the theme file that was unfixable before, plus this new unfixable one. So we have a doc comment being empty and a description property missing from the info.yaml file. Um, so let's go ahead and fix what we have. Um, and we can do that by just filling in some content here. A useful description of this function. That makes that squiggle go away, and you can see that it's changed the to-do comment. You can also see that we have some further squiggles down here for things that PHPStan is picking up. Now, there was one other issue reported, and that was over in the theme. So if I go over to that info file, there's one thing I want to point out about the way the tooling works in VS Code. The best PHP coding standards plugin that I can find for VS Code only scans PHP files. So we don't get the squiggles for this YAML file, and I just can't find a better extension that does that. But to fix that issue, we just go and add an extension here. I mean, a description here. See if I can type. Um, then once we save that, if we flip back to the terminal and run PHPCS, that returns clear. And if we run PHP checks or ddev checks, we are down to 5 checks that found issues, and PHPCS isn't on the list anymore. All right, so assuming we're still okay on time, looks like we're okay. I want to show you PHPStan next because I have a recommended workflow here. So first, let's run ddev PHPStan. And we can see that there are 5 errors, which is great for a first run. Usually you're going to see more than that if you have an existing code base. So let's start by opening up our PHPStan config file. And at the bottom of this file, you're going to see instructions for generating a baseline file, which is what I recommend you do when you first start running PHP stans. If you find that there's a lot of errors and it's going to be overwhelming to fix them, just generate a baseline file to tell PHP Stan, ignore these issues that I already had. I just want to start checking new issues, and then you can slowly go through and whittle down your baseline file and get that clean over time. So now if I'll just keep the terminal here so that I can run the commands here. So now if I run PHP Stan again, oh, wait a minute, skipped a step. So first I need to run the command that we just talked about. So if I generate that baseline, watch the bottom of this config file because something will change. If I run to generate the baseline, we auto insert, and it's not showing up quickly. We auto insert and include so that that baseline is included. And now if I run that check again, see that we have no errors. Um, and that's because the baseline file is telling it to ignore those 5 errors. For the moment, I'm going to comment out this include. Uh, and let's go open a file that has PHPStan errors. And just to confirm, if I run PHPStan again, I'm back to having those same 5 errors. Let's see, lost my place. Okay, so this has an issue with PHPStan that we're saying we're going to return an integer and we're returning a string. So we can easily fix that to make this a very useful function that just returns whatever you pass to it. But that resolves the PHPStan issue we were having here. And now if I go back to to my config file for PHPStan, and I enable the baseline again. If I run PHPStan again, I have no errors, but we do still have, if we open up the baseline file, we do still have it reporting in here somewhere that, where is it? This one that we're expecting to return an integer and we're returning something else. We're still reporting that in the baseline file. I'd like to keep that clean. And so what I recommend you do is scroll up here to where it says report unmatched ignored errors and change that to true. And that will just warn you if I run this command again, it's going to give me one error and it's telling me that it's basically telling me that I'm ignoring an error that doesn't exist anymore. And so that'll trigger me to go in here and remove this from my baseline file, and I can keep my baseline file clean. So we're back to no errors, and then we could keep working on these PHPStan issues as we have time, and it won't block us from going forward with clean code on the new code that we write that is not ignored in our baseline. So the Prettier, ESLint, and Stylelint tools all work very much the same. So I'll demo one of them and then we can kind of blaze through the other ones. Let's start with Prettier. I'll run ddev Prettier. And we see warnings in 5 files. And it tells us that we can add -- write to fix that. And we can. But I've also added a -fix variant to all of these tools. So instead of that, we can run Prettier fix, which will do the same thing as -- write. But if we want to preview what Prettier is going to change before we go ahead, I've also added a preview option to all of these. So if you do -- preview, what it'll do is go through and write a patch file, which will be in the DCQ reports directory. And ID is not updating as fast as I'd like it to for this, but here it is. So I can see exactly what's going to be changed by running that command. If for some reason I want to do that, and I can see that it's taking out a line break here. It's taking out an extra space. It's changing formatting in CSS and changing the formatting in JavaScript. So I can go ahead and apply these changes. And if I run Prettier again, all files match the Prettier code style. And since we cleaned up PHPStan a bit ago, I think we're going to be down a couple of checks that are failing when we run ddev checks. Yeah, we've only got 3 now that have these issues. So let's try out ESLint next. We run ddev ESLint. There are 2 problems in one file, and one of them can be fixed automatically. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, and then let's open up the one that couldn't fix. Okay, we got a squiggle up here. It wants strict equality. So if I change that and I run my ddev checks again, I'm going to find that I have only 2 things failing now, which is great. What's left is Stylelint and CSpell. So let's check Stylelint. There's one fixable and one unfixable issue. So let's run Stylelint fix. And now we got just one unfixable issue in this unfixable.css. Open that up. And yeah, hash 12 is not a color, but 129 is a beautiful blue. We save that fix, and we should be down to just one check that's failing, which is CSpell. And so let's run that CSpell command. It's reporting 3 issues in the same file. So if I open up this file, you can see that 2 of these are spelling errors. And one of them is, this sentence is true, by the way, ddev has a great new terminal user. What does Thule stand for again? Forget. But it's an interface on the terminal. And maybe, yeah, and you can get to it by running ddev. But so we want to fix these two. So let's just go ahead and fix the spelling problems. But what is that going on there? Okay. But let's say, and CSpell knows about ddev, but somehow my IDE doesn't, so I get squiggles here. But if I run CSpell again, I should see just one issue reported. And let's say that Thule is a it's not Thule, is it? That's why I can't remember. Sorry. Whatever it is, whatever the acronym is for a terminal interface. So if that is an important word in my project, I can use the autocomplete here and tap, and I can see that I have CSpell suggest as an option. And if I run that, it will have put in this DCQ reports project. Gonna need to refresh again. It puts in two lists here. One is what words it didn't recognize, and then the other one is what it would update your project word list to be. And you can just see it simply here. It's just added Thule to the word list. So if I say to apply that, and I go down and load our project words.txt, you'll see it's just what we said it would be. If I run CSpell again, I should have no more issues. If I run ddev checks, we should have a clean bill of health. And if you see this green checkbox, you know that your custom code is passing all the checks that Drupal's GitLab CI runs against contrib code, and you would be good to push it. Assuming that you haven't introduced bugs that that tooling can't catch. Just to quickly demo, actually, I don't need to demo it, but yeah, I can do it. Let's just say that we added something else to the end of composer.json, which is going to make it invalid if I run ddev checks. It's going to catch that and tell me that my composer doesn't validate anymore. And that was it for the demo of how to do that stuff. So let me switch back over to the slides again. And I wanted to talk about a couple things here. One is troubleshooting, what to do when things aren't working. If your PHP tooling doesn't work, like PHPCS or PHPStan, it may be that you skip the step of installing those dependencies, or somehow those have become uninstalled. So run ddev composer install, or if you're missing that dependency altogether, you can either rerun the installer for the add-on, or you can require core dev as a dev dependency on your own. The same thing with ESLint, CSpell, Stylelint, and Prettier. Those are node-based dependencies, so you can do a ddev npm install or a ddev yarn install. And then if you're not seeing squiggles in your IDE, make sure that the tooling, the configurations for your add-ons are configured to point to the binaries that exist in .ddev/Drupal-code-quality/tooling/bin. And then finally, I wanted to point out that there are some other add-ons that do similar things for different scenarios. So if you're working on a contrib module, you probably want the ddev-drupal-contrib add-on. And if you're doing core development, you probably want one of these Drupal core dev add-ons. I think Joachim's add-on is the more recent one. I think he took over maintaining it, but I could be wrong about that. Look at which one has more recent commits. And then if you're working on a full website project, that's when you'll want this one, the ddev Drupal code quality add-on. Uh, what I'm hoping to do in the near future, I would like to get some starter configs in for other editors. So if you're on NeoVim or PHP Storm or something like that, I would hope that we can set you up to use those shim commands out of the box too. I'd like to add a command called ddev checks full, which would watch out for PHP unit tests and possibly even playwright tests and things like that, and run those as part of the checks as well. Um, I'm currently working on better installer output, so I hope that with a release coming out soon, that will make it a little bit easier to notice when there are problems with your install or when there's something you should notice. And then now that we've rolled this out on our team, there's a bit of a call for us to have the same thing for WordPress. So I may try to build this to give similar checks for our WordPress projects. And with that, I'll open it up for any questions.
So that's pretty cool. Um, any quick solutions or easy fixes for switching between Drupal versions? Right, the ping pong of the pipeline I am familiar with, but the it passes in Drupal 11 but fails in Drupal 10 kind of issues, or what I often find. Like that's the issue I'm often dealing with.
I'm not sure if I heard all of that. Your audio broke up for me a little bit. But are you talking about when you are needing to upgrade between actually, let me ask you to just restate the question if I could. I'm not sure if I got it.
Sure. Right on the CI/CD pipelines, there can be multiple different versions of Drupal that you can test against. So like, right, test for major version, major next version, minor next version, minor previous, minor next, right, and current version of Drupal.
Yeah, I got you now. Um, yeah, currently I don't have anything built in for that. I know that GitLab CI has some variables you can set up so you can have it run tests against all of those. Um, this is
You know,
assuming that you're developing a website, and so you probably have a version that you're pinned to. Um, and that you'd when you're ready to do an upgrade, you'd update your tooling versions, and then you check against that. So I haven't. I'd welcome a pull request for or some ideas on that, but it's not something that I saw where it would be useful for a website enough to roll it out. Anything else?
I'm sure there would be more if more people were here just late in the day.
Uh, uh,
I see Ralph
well,
with his hand up, who has already given me a couple of issues on the add-on. I really appreciate that.
yeah, I'm sorry for that. I will know more maybe. Um, just one question because it's a bit of a hunt to find it. Where is it defined, or where's the config? Which directories the add-on is checking?
Okay, yeah, it's going to be different for each command, but if we open up
Oh, okay.
it's just using your config files just like the tooling normally would, and we copy in. So if we look at PHPCS.xml, we've got some exclude patterns here to make sure that we're not checking contrib and that we are checking common custom directories.
Okay.
And I
Um,
have had some problems with this in the recent past, so I just pushed an update recently. So if you're running into that trouble on an older version of the add-on, it may be worth running the installer again.
okay. Then just one idea or suggestion right away. Would it make sense to basically, instead of hard coding the web um, path, instead use the doc root ddev variable? And that way, if basically the doc root is set to web, then it's web. Then, or if you,
Yes.
for example, have nothing, then it's basically the project root, and that way it would be way more flexible
We
out
actually
of the
do
box.
that. So on install, we detect where what your doc root is, and we
Ah,
write the
okay.
config files. But the config files can understand those variables, so we hard code them at install time, and hopefully you're not switching your doc root frequently.
Ah, okay, okay, but then okay, then interesting. Then after the talk, I'll give it a try because there is a new add-on that is basically mixing core contribution with contrib, and I'm really interested to see if basically that tooling of yours is working with it. Then okay, cool. That
Cool.
answers
If
it.
it's
Thank
like
you.
those other two that I talked about, I would guess not because uh, I think this add-on defines some of the same commands that they do, so they probably stomp on each
No,
other.
no, no.
Not that
They
one.
no. There's no
Great.
interference in that regard, and therefore it would work.
Awesome.
I will test and write a post, an issue, or I'll
Thank you.
write your heads up on the Drupal Slack. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Anything else?
All right. I'm gonna stop the recording unless anybody has last minute
Well,
question.
thanks everyone for spending your time with me. I appreciate it. And there's the slide QR code in case the recording's still going.
Yes, it's still going. I
Okay,
also
awesome.
put the repo in the chat.